Howdy, all of you delicious people. I'm here today to review Army of Thieves. So, here's the thing. I honestly had no interest in watching this film. I'm being honest. Like, I already knew how this was going to break down, and it basically was going to be a throwaway film. And really, it was just going to eventually, at the end of it, be probably the only real important thing to eventually tie Ludwig into eventually the Army of the Dead. But I'm assuming that eventually what is to be really had after this Army of Thieves film is eventually we're just starting to eventually go on and get other prequel movies of all these characters who are to eventually be dead from another film. And then we might actually come back to Army of the Dead 2 with a completely different story. So, because there's a whole money-making scheme to be had here, because eventually Netflix is to always just be like, ha ha ha, like we knew that this movie is going to be hugely successful. Now we're going to start cranking out and do these prequel movies leading up to that one point that everybody is to enjoy this one film. And so I think people might just bizarrely like this movie to just be like, man, I wish we could have had a sequel of this. Which we technically do have one, which is technically Army the Dead. But anyways, going on to this film, this movie just feels chucked together because there needs to be no effort put into this film, and it feels that way. We really have it to where there's just this hodgepodge of things that just are to be the easiest thing of how to put together a film. We really just have a story that ends up opening this film. It's like, I wonder where our main character is going. Ooh. Like, I wonder if this is going to be yet another heist film, because it has to be. Plus, with this being a prequel movie, we basically have barely to no zombies to really be had here. Really, if anything, they have to kind of clickbait you on that, or they eventually have this dream sequence that is to make you believe that there is zombies somehow in this film, but they aren't really. Just being honest. There is no zombies basically in this film whatsoever, seemingly. That is to attach to the actual story. So, because it's a prequel movie, and plus, like, they do have the zombie breakout, and they are supposedly to be concerned about that. But then you also have Interpol that is to basically just be like, hey, yeah, we have a zombie apocalypse going on, and that should be the most important thing going on right now, right? And we have our main detective that's like, oh no, like, I have to tell you the whole entire villain's master plan as if I know it way ahead of time because I just do weirdly. And so you would think that these people would have these plans in place to eventually be ahead of time where these people are before they are, but they aren't. It seems like these people kind of easily go through and make to these saves like it's the easiest thing in the world. How we reasonably have no point where these people are to really be sweating anything, even though Ludwig is to supposedly be this person who is to be much more nervous than the rest of the group. Because he is to be tied with a team in this film. A team that is super generic, and it really just, like, they give us a backstory, but they really could have just said, okay, this person is to basically be the getaway guy. This person is to basically be the tech person. This person is to be the muscle if anything goes wrong. And then Gwendolyn is to be the super generic character that we have her skill to just, like, it seems like she's a thief, but there's a lot of gray areas with this character because this character has to just kind of be like ready for anything. Because she supposedly has this combatant like skill, what eventually we'll head into the movie with. So I would say that this movie, like basically in my own like head, like I was thinking, I'm like, okay, this movie is going to be a bad film, but how bad is it going to be? Really, I really just like my interest started to fade every once in a while in this film. Most of this movie, or some parts, or quite a good chunk of this movie isn't even in English, because why would they even bother doing that? Because there's no real effort. It's just like, hey guys, like the dialogue doesn't matter in this movie. Who cares about it? We even have a point where Gwendolyn is talking about her backstory, and Ludwig is just nodding off, or eventually just going and like talking into his head, having us be like, yeah, like we probably wouldn't have cared about this whole moment either, where Gwendolyn is talking about her backstory, even though supposedly Ludwig is to seemingly more and more in this movie eventually fall for someone in this film, even though there is to be a ripe girl throwing herself at him in the beginning of this movie. Ludwig really just doesn't like. Ludwig is just like, well, I guess I'm going to end up with somebody, but there isn't much proof of that because Army of Dead. Uh, so, uh, so yeah, we do have some fun characters in here that are to be presented in this team. Um, but yeah, like it's basically just the like this movie is so generic and it's just such a throwaway film that Netflix just wanted to make money off of because they knew how well received Army of the Dead was going to be. So they put this together because like money making scheme. In all honesty, it's being truthful. Uh, like I honestly thought this movie was like I knew it was going to be bad, but really I just was like, why am I even watching this film? It kind of just got to that point where it's just like I knew this was going to be bad, but like everybody watched it, everybody like saw this thing, whether they liked it or whatever, like they watched it regardless, and so I was like, well, like I guess I'll watch this because it seems to be a popular thing. So with that said, let's go into that double five time territory. Let's just go into spoilers about this one. So let's go into spoiler time. Spoiler time. It's about that time getting to spoil this movie. So Ludwig is to in the beginning of this film, we find out that Ludwig is to be a YouTuber. Like I feel like I've kind of got all the prerequisite stuff out of the way. I feel like don't need to like really go in depth about the critiquing of whatever of this film because it's not worth it. It's a throwaway film that eventually a lot of people had seen. So Ludwig is a YouTuber. He's a YouTuber that is to have a hard time getting views on his YouTube channel. Like, join the club. Join the club, Ludwig. It's not easy. It's not easy being green. Or in this case, white or red, whatever the YouTube colors actually are. And if logo is to tell you so, it'd be red and white. So there we go. That's the answer. So Ludwig is to, of course, put this story together about Hans Wagner's safes. Evidently, these guys to have created 4 different safes, 3 of which that we will be focusing upon in this movie for these people to get more and more of this thing called money, because why wouldn't they? So, eventually, Wagner is to have eventually masterfully crafted all of these safes. But then at the end, Wagner is to eventually decide that he is otherwise going to go on and lock himself into the safe. And then supposedly the people who are to have had Wagner's safe go and toss him into this water for whatever reason. This guy locked himself in his own safe to eventually, I guess, die, to have them just dump his safe into this water for him to just continue on being dead, I guess. I guess it's lucky that this guy didn't actually decide to like break out of this whole safe at any point in time, because I don't think he could have been possibly been able to. It seems maybe he did have the option, because he does have that little wheel thing there. But anyways, so maybe what if someone was to actually locksmith and get him out, because Hans Wagner, of course, was a professional locksmith, and hence why we have this story here about him putting these unique safes together. And so eventually Wagner is to tell this story, and it's all la-di-da. And so eventually we find out that Wagner is to seemingly be this bank teller, and like, yeah, what a what a just wow, like what a surprise, right? A bank teller who is like the most like stereotypical job that they could have given this guy, a locksmith being a bank teller. Wow, this is really just breaking in the whole ideas of this film. So Ludwig eventually is to go and seemingly work this 9-to-5 job, having this cucumber sandwich, going on breaks, so on and so forth. So Ludwig is eventually to go home to eventually check his YouTube notifications. Luckily, he has some, because not everyone gets them, but I do. Luckily, because people are nice and great people. Thank you for anybody doing anything upon this channel. I'm not to sound ungrateful, because I am, because this channel has done surprisingly well than what I could have thought it would, no matter how slow that it has gone, no matter how much I've made stupid ideas to try to put things out there. Probably another one of these might be this one, because people may have zero interest, and I could understand that. So, and if you do, thank you. So, so Ludwig is to go home to again check his notifications on his YouTube video to find out that all of a sudden someone is to just be like, well, like it seems that this guy has some kind of skill of sorts. So this guy needs to go and test his skill. He's getting some weird notification through comment sections of like, why wouldn't Ludwig have an email on his YouTube channel that he would get emailed, because that would seem to have a much more private conversation. If anything, a police officer could eventually go and find this notification thread and just be like, oh my god, which eventually the detective who is actually to be Delacroix is to eventually find this video, because I guess this guy is to just stumble upon YouTube for the first time and eventually just go and be like, hey, people who could possibly be safecrackers. Let's find the top 10 of safecrackers on YouTube. And somebody might have put a video together of top 10 safecrackers on YouTube, and then I'm like, oh, maybe I could go through and find that specific guy. Hopefully there's a link to his channel. Oh, there is. Oh. That's what probably happened, right? What kind of garbage stuff is that? So, coincidentally, oh my god, I found this guy's YouTube video where he's talking about these Hans Wagner safes. Because luckily, I want to really YouTube and find anybody who has real information about the Hans Wagner safes, and it's the same guy who is to steal all and be a locksmith, and this guy has to be perfect. Whatever, just whatever. If we can just have convenient stories that are to be plopped down like that. But anyways, pushing on. So Ludwig is to go to this underground safe cracking weird goofy game thing where all of a sudden all these people are to be tossed a safe in front of them. Like a group of people are to be surrounding the safe, And so Ludwig doesn't even know what's going on. And so immediately this guy who has no clue about any of this is to have easily just been tossed into this whole thing by saying some magically delicious word that is to toss him into this whole thing because um, this girl had sent him a comment to say like, hey, go to this one location and tell them this password right off the comment section where anybody could have taken that, gone to that same location, said that password, and eventually been ushered into this whole contest of things. Again, an email would have been way better off in this whole entire thing. Um, but you know what? I'll say this. I think I like Ludwig better in this movie than I probably do in Army of the Dead. This character in Army of the Dead was really an annoying character that that I was just like, okay, I can't wait for Batista to come back on screen because I just love Dave Batista. And I didn't care about anyone else. Anyone else could have all died. I was waiting for how long Batista was going to be in this film of Army of the Dead because I just like Dave Batista. Plus, I just like big, muscular guys anyways. Especially when you have it be that it's an action movie and like there is something about me that likes 80s action movies, but also can also like the fighting things of stuff that's kind of going on in the much more current stuff, but to each their own. So I can kind of I can like both kinds of action things, but like I always like unique looking action stars. Because all of them look the exact same at some freaking point because basically they cast it that way to where everybody looks the exact freaking same. But pushing on. I like Dave because he sticks out. Plus, he's like, I like him. He's really good at what he does. But pushing on, back to Ludwig. So they have him go through this safe, and of course, he kind of slowly but surely is the last one to be cracking the safe because he wasn't even paying attention. Every single time someone is to crack a safe, they are to put out this fake gun and plow it into the air to just be like bang, and it's like, okay, that's stupid. So like it's kind of like the Joker gun in like any Batman thing where eventually you just have the fake bang flag thing, which I thought was stupid, but it's whatever. So so eventually, since Ludwig is to, I guess, figure out what is to go on, which is to basically just continue to crack safes, it should be a simple enough concept, right? They couldn't even pronounce. Ludwig's name, so they end up calling him like the nervous guy or something like that. So I don't even want to try even pronouncing Dieter, but I already just said it, so I just say Ludwig. So, because it's easier. So, because eventually at the end of the movie, that's what his passport is to say. It's Dieter Ludwig. So, because eventually Ludwig is to have seemingly a name that no one can really pronounce all that well. I'm like, well, that's great for your main character to have a name that no one can pronounce. That's always the best thing, right? So, so they go along, and so of course we have Ludwig, who with time is starting to get better and better, to where it seems, of course, that he and this one guy who are to be left are to go and crack the safe. It seems like this. It seems like the guy that Ludwig is going against is to have been this champion, and so Ludwig may quite possibly dethrone this guy. Do you think it's going to happen? Of course it does. We have Ludwig who just kind of easily just cracks this safe like it's nobody's business and is to open it up and just be like, ha ha ha, I won. And so all of a sudden we have Gwendolyn that is looking off in the stands just like, oh yeah, like I'm going to go and hire that guy. So of course, Ludwig is the new champion. I'm sure he's not going to go into other bouts and try to see who's better or whatever. I think that this was just a one-time thing to, of course, give us to be having this character just be like, oh, well, of course he's going to be the one-time easiest thing and whatever. So pushing on. So eventually after this, Ludwig is to eventually continue to go on through his common day-to-day stuff to eventually have at some point when eventually he is to go and get his coffee for his day. Eventually, Gwendolyn is to stop him, and he is to just kind of pour coffee all over himself. So, Gwendolyn goes and pulls Ludwig aside and is to tell him, like, well, hey, like, I was the one that sent you that comment on your video. And he's like, oh, you watched my YouTube video? Like, I am just gonna so not give a rip about any point in time in this movie where eventually there is not an English part in this film. Like, I'm gonna also try to rush through this review also, so if people don't like a rushed variation of the spoiler talk of this, then that's okay. You can go out of your way and find a person that has more detailing of whatever. But yeah, because this movie is just a chuck together film. Like, I would probably deem this movie to be an awful film, but people will watch it anyway, so my grading, like, does not matter. My grading system for this movie does not matter, because people will watch it regardless, and they already have. So no matter if I was to say, yeah, this movie sucked, it was awful, it doesn't matter. This one is one of those where it's like people are going to watch it regardless, because I'm just being honest. Like, I'm kind of forced into watching this because I didn't want to watch it at all, but it's popular, so I just felt that I was kind of squeezed into this by having to do it. So back to the story. Ludwig, Gwen, I think I'm just going to call her Gwen this whole time because I'm not going to say the whole Gwendolyn name. I just want to sum up names, and I wish they could have done that during this movie, to just have short, brief names. Like, we have Karina, we have Brad, we have Ralph, eventually, that Ludwig is eventually going to find. So, like, those seem to be shorter names, right? So, Ludwig is to have Gwen eventually be offered, like, hey, do you want to be our safecracker for our unique adventure we're going to have for this film? And, like, we're going to go ahead and have you crack all 3 of these saves, and it's not even going to be about the money. It's just going to be the adventure of all of it, because basically they don't even give a about getting the money. They don't even care about getting the money. All they care about is just being able to successfully do a thing. And it seems like there's not really a true, legitimate thought process of really doing any number of these heists. It's just like, hey, we're just going to go in there and eventually we're going to, like, say that we have some kind of dummy account, and then we're just going to go in there and just crack open this safe because, like that's all we're going to do. It's going to be the easiest thing in the world. So, and like in the further on like cases, we eventually just have it where it's like, yeah, like Ludwig's just gonna go in there and eventually just walk right through there and just easily just make it through all these elevators and all through this stuff, and he'll easily just make it to this safe, and then we'll have to just have him uncrack this. And there's barely any real action in here, or if there is any action, there's to be non-lethal action, because no one is to really die in here, except for maybe the people who eventually become supposed zombies and news reports in this film. Then, like, maybe you could say that those are dead people, but, like, they're undead, so they don't count. Technically, they do. But anyways, they don't count. They do. Anyways, pushing on. So, let's get into the... So Ludwig accepts this, of course, and then so Ludwig ends up having to find who are all of the people that he's going to be working with. Corina, who is to be this very attractive woman who is to basically just ask Ludwig in the early part of this movie, hey, do you want to make out? And he's like, no. Because immediately he's looking at Gwen and he's like, I want me some of that action. And Coraline is to just be like, well, she's technically, it seems that she might be intertwined with Brad, so you might be wasting your time. So Karina, who's to be an attractive lady, that honestly should have had Ludwig be like, yeah, give me some of that. Because he's technically not intertwined with anybody, but to each their own. So we go to Rolf, who Rolf is to be the getaway driver, which we end up finding out that he was in previous times like the Ferris Bueller of getaway drivers, where basically he was to be a valet that ended up taking someone's car and driving the heck out of it, and then eventually giving it back to him. I'm like, what's up with all the valet movies now? Like, do we have to have it to where it's like when we saw Shang-Chi, no offense for anybody that hasn't seen that movie yet, Shang-Chi was a valet driver in that movie, or Shang-Chi, however you want to freaking pronounce it, I don't really care. I hated that movie, that's in all honesty. And so immediately when I saw Ralph was a valet, I was like, really? Like, okay, like, I guess that's the thing now, to just be like getaway drivers. Like, they had to go with the most stereotypical, like, getaway driver, like, daytime job. And I was like, everything has to be just so, like, they have to go through the stereotypical thing of, like, of how people were to do the things that they do. This movie, like, reeks. And I mean reeks. I mean, like, reeks of just, like, this feels too much like the Italian Job for me, where instead of it being focused on Mark Wahlberg's character, they focus on Charlize Theron's character. And hilariously enough, Ludwig is blonde, Charlize Theron is blonde in the Italian Job movie. So it's basically like one and the same kind of movies, right? Basically now everyone should just go and watch Italian Job because that's such a better movie. And that that movie had nothing to do with zombies, and neither does this. So it's basically same playing field here. Plus, Italian Job actually has better actors. It has Jason Statham. It has Mark Wahlberg. It has Edward Norton. For some people that are on the fence of quality of Edward Norton, I actually like Edward Norton. I've seen Fight Club. Fight Club is great. No matter what people are to say about it, that they probably would hope at some point and one day eventually Fight Club would have a sequel movie. They technically had a sequel comic book. I'm going off the rails. Let's go back. Because this movie is completely disinteresting to me. So pushing on. So we end up finding out Brad. Brad is to be called Brad Cage. Because supposedly, I guess, Brad has changed his name, possibly, to Brad Cage. Because this guy is to supposedly be the stereotypical actor or action star guy, because evidently Brad had went to school one day and had gotten beat up. So Brad decided to go home one day, watch all the action movies that he's ever seen in his life, and then eventually start to lift weights, and which is like, lift weights meaning he lifted a bunch of books weirdly. And so, which I'm like, how is it like, dude, I can barely, like, with the concoction of which that this guy was to bench, like, I've had it to where I didn't have an actual bench, like, in my house. So what I did was I just used this, like, this chair and this bed, and I just kind of, like, just benched that way, which is really unsafe, because, like, eventually the weight is eventually to get heavy. But every single time I would go and eventually I would, like, just be, like, God, this is so unsafe, but I just wanted to do it anyways. Because I couldn't figure out a way to eventually, like, afford a bench or whatever. I didn't have much of money, but I wanted to, like, exercise because I wanted to look better or seem healthier. And so eventually I did get a bench when eventually I could afford more money. And so, like, eventually things were much safer at some point. But this guy is even worse. He just stacks a bunch of books together. Like we have Bruce Willis from Unbreakable here, where like he's taking like paint buckets and taping them to a stick and just kind of like yeah, I'm getting my muscles in. So pushing on. So Brad evidently was to watch Con Air weirdly, and I guess he ended up getting his name Brad Cage. If Brad Pitt and Nicolas Cage supposedly effed and had a baby, that's what this guy would have supposedly been for whatever freaking reason. We end up having Rolf, who is to mention a reference of Gone in 60 Seconds. So I'm just like, what is all the Nick Cage references here that they have in this movie? Is somebody just having a hard on for Nick Cage in this film? What's going on here? Like I guess like they were just thinking of all the Nick Cage movies while they're just to put this thing together. I don't know. So I guess they figured like who is the funniest action star that eventually they could probably get like some references here of. I don't know. It was weird. So eventually we find out who all the people are, and immediately it seems that Brad is going to possibly give Ludwig a hard time because since uh, since technically Brad is the muscle in this thing and Ludwig is technically the brains, I guess, of this outfit, really we have it where, like, of course they're going to butt heads. Supposedly, Gwendolyn is to seemingly be this thief, and eventually when she's to be at this coffee shop with Ludwig before this whole thing broke out, where they're kind of talking to one another, Gwendolyn is to mention that everyone that was to have been in this cafe she had stolen something from. She had stolen a watch from some guy, a gun from someone, and a ring from somebody, and so on and so forth, to prove how like skilled that she is. So eventually Gwendolyn goes and like, well, I guess I'll give everything back to all these people, with the exclusion of the one guy who is to have a gun. I'm keeping this. So eventually Ludwig is to meet the team and is to eventually just be like, well, wait a minute, like, we have a lot smaller of a team here. Like, this is all we're going to do is just be with these, like, 5 guys and put together this whole, like, scheme where we need the fewest amount of people. And Gwendolyn is like, well, yeah, because, like, they didn't give about casting a lot of people in this film. And Ludwig's like, ah. I say that's not what they say in the film, but really, like, do you really think that they should have had a huge, massive cast for this kind of movie? A crack-safing film? No. I would have expected them to have, like, just, like, Ludwig and Gwen and a guy with a laptop, and that's all they had. Like, look at National Treasure. Like, how, like, when Nicolas Cage like stole the Declaration of Independence, like it was just him and a guy and a laptop, and that's all they needed. So because evidently again they're not going to care about actually getting all of this money out of this safe, because rationally there's a whole 2 bags or possibly 1 bag that they end up going on to try and steal all of this money. That makes no rational sense in my own mind, how small of bags that they have for them eventually trying to go and steal all of this money. It makes no sense. Because when you look at it, you have like their bag and you have this like wooden pallet just filled to about like waist high of money. And I'm just like, yeah, you're not going to easily take all that money out. And plus, also, I don't even think banks even really have, like, a safe full of money anymore. I think safes are, like, a dying thing where, like, all banks would usually have, like, have gone digital now. So I don't even understand this kind of concept anymore of cracking a safe, because I don't feel like it really matters anymore. If you're going to break into, like, God, what is the, the one Die Hard movie where eventually they have, like, the the gold bars and the whatever, where it's to be like the Simon movie, where it's like Die Hard with a Vengeance, and it has like Bruce Willis and Samuel L. Jackson, and I'm trying to think of what that big, huge la-di-da place is that eventually they're to have Simon crack into that whole thing. Uh, it's not coming to me, so eventually let me know in the comments below what that is, because I'm sure somebody probably will, because I have no idea. I might pause here to actually figure out what that was. Fort Knox? I couldn't even find out where it was. Like, I couldn't even find it in Google. Like, it was taking too long, so I'm like, it's Fort Knox, right? Because I know Nakatomi Plaza is the very first movie thing where, like, I don't know why I still know Nakatomi Plaza, but that's the building in the first Die Hard movie. But yeah, Fort Knox. They go to Fort Knox, and supposedly, I guess that movie ends up having a lot of inaccuracies. Supposedly, because supposedly in Die Hard with a Vengeance, supposedly the trucks, like you can't actually fit that amount of gold in supposedly the trucks that they are to have in that movie. Weirdly, like I ended up siphoning that off of something that I read, where it's like, oh yeah, that's an inaccuracy, and I'm like, okay, sure, whatever. But it's a cool action movie, right? Yeah, well, anyways, pushing on. So, now that I got that out of the way, as if that actually did matter, so now we have, seemingly, we have the very first heist. And so immediately we have Brad and we have Gwen telling Ludwig through this first heist, because technically he's sweating and technically he's really just kind of worried about this whole like heist thing, which here's the thing, doesn't the bank have cameras in it? How is it that the Interpol agents couldn't have figured out exactly who these people were because they weren't wearing ski masks? I am so confused. Wouldn't they have gone into the footage of who was actually there at the bank this day and been like, it must have been those people that had robbed this bank blind. Let's go and look into putting a warrant out for these people's arrest. But again, like, the Interpol ends up doing a horrible job at their job anyways, because it doesn't matter. It's just like, ooh, hey, Interpol eventually catches up to these guys later on in the movie, and it just becomes, all of a sudden, Ludwig is just a bike expert, and he can just, like, just do any tricks and whatever, luckily, because he's Ludwig, right? Did Ludwig actually perform any of these bike tricks? I highly doubt it. Because you don't actually see his face while doing any of these tricks. And why would you? Because why would this person want to learn these tricks to do this stuff in this movie? It makes no rational sense. What if Ludwig had never even biked before he had even done this movie? That would have been hilarious. But we'll never know that, will we? Matthias? Sure. Moving on, if I even pronounce that ballparkingly close. So, it's probably Matthias? Matthias? Is that correct? Let's move on, because who cares? I've wasted too much time on this review anyways. So, they go into, of course, this first bank scheme, and they basically do exactly what I say, or what I had said earlier, where supposedly they put together a dummy bank account, and so they end up going in there into where the vault is. And then eventually we have Ludwig, who's to go in there first and go into the bathroom, and then eventually wait till Gwen is to kind of call him over to crack the safe. And so they end up easily cracking the safe. They bizarrely have these duffel bags that don't make sense for how much money is to be taken out of this thing. But Gwen immediately says, like, hey, like, it isn't about us getting all of this money. It's just us going and cracking the safe is to be the main achievement. I'm like, no, like, the whole thing is getting all of this money. because what is the point of the movie? Like, to just, like, be in awe of how you achieve this? No, I don't give a crap about that. Like, I would have wanted there to have something go horribly awry during this whole scheme to make this a much more interesting movie, which it doesn't deliver that. It doesn't deliver that at all. So eventually, while supposedly, so Ludwig is back in the truck, and they are to explain this whole scheme of how this is all going to perfectly work out. And so Ludwig is just to be like, well, hey, um, do you really think that all that is going to perfectly work out? And they're like, dude, like, it already did. And so look at your hands. You have all the money. And we're like, yeah, they did it. Because that was severely easy. And they'll just keep continuing to get easier and easier through every single one of these things. So, and that first safe, of course, was the Rheingold. Now we're eventually going to go to the Valkyrie. So the first thing is to be done, and they're kind of celebrating. So we have, supposedly, that's when we get to the part where Karina is to kind of throw herself at Ludwig, and Ludwig is like, yeah, no. And so eventually, so Karina is to eventually tell Ludwig that, well, if you're going to go and try with Gwen, like, you're probably going to be wasting your time, because it seems that Brad and Gwen have had this really long stretch of relationship, and like they've done like heists and stuff before. So now, since this first safe is to be cracked, we now have Interpol stepping in, and so we end up on the news having word of a zombie invasion or apocalypse going on. And so now we end up having Beatrix, who is to tell Delacroix, it's like, well, hey, like, shouldn't we be focusing on a zombie apocalypse rather than this whole, like, heist thing? Like, shouldn't we have higher priorities? And this guy's like, no, like, I don't know. Like, I don't even care about the zombie apocalypse. Like, just let that just go wild and whatever, because, like, a ton of people are going to die from that anyways. But Dave Bautista isn't, because he's unstoppable. But, like, you can't stop Dave Bautista. You can't. It's basically a non-issue. So I'm trying to be funny, but it's not working. Moving on. So Delacroix is to eventually go on and retell us the whole entire scheme of these evil do-wares, because he is to have masterfully, craftedly figure this out, and have it not just be the fact that these people were to do this one-time job and then be done with it. He's like, no, like, they're going to go through all of these saves and crack all of them. Like, it's like, it has to happen this way. And so you would have thought that these saves would have had extra security on any number of them, but they don't. And so, like, that's on them. That's the stupidity of these people. So, but yeah, they're like, yeah, we gotta get these people. Yeah, we gotta get them, because I know they're gonna go through all these saves. They have to. Whatever, okay, Interpol people. You know, in every single, like, police kind of thing, they always have to have, like, the most severely generic police officers they can muster and find. Like, it's always either the FBI, or it's some kind of generic branch, or they have to, like, invent a certain branch of police officers to be, like, specifically for, like, a movie, and that never makes sense to just be like, okay, so you're creating a heist division just so that way you can, like, have some expertise that is to seemingly be this smarter guy than everyone else. And, like, I always think that that's garbage in a film when eventually they have to, like, have these things that don't actually exist. just so that way they can seem like they have like somebody who is to just be like it kind of feels like the Death Note freaking films, the original one, where we have like the one guy who is to seemingly figure out the whole Death Note scenario because he's just smarter than everyone else. So, going on. So now now we have the second case. We're going to push on to the next thing. So, so Ludwig ends up just kind of going in to this bank, and it seems like he goes through a cluster of a number of different elevators and stuff like that. And so Karina is basically telling him where all to go, and that he's to basically have this like security badge and all this junk to eventually get through here. And Karina is to watch him on the cameras and to basically have him supposedly pretend that he can open up this door, which he actually can't. So Ludwig is the only one going down to this secondary safe, but eventually Gwen is to eventually meet him down there, beating down these guards, and then giving Ludwig all the time in the world to eventually go and unlock this case, or unlock this safe. So, of course, Ludwig does, and so they end up taking like 2 bags of money. Ooh, 2 bags this time around. Everything all fits in 1 or 2 huge briefcases, but we always have to have the inaccuracies of everything. Like basically look at I think like Rush Hour, like the briefcases are supposed to be like $50 million or something. And they're like, $50 million? Who do you think you kidnapped? Chelsea Clinton? And like, there's obviously like 1 whole briefcase or 2 whole briefcases that have supposedly $10 million, which that would not have been the case. It'd be like huge things of briefcases. Like they would have had to have had like seemingly like 10, probably some odd cases for $1 million for each thing. But it's whatever, right? There has to be loads of inaccuracies. So these people probably got like $100,000 maybe, if that was to really have been in these actual cases. So, so now we get to the point where it seems like the Interpol cops are on their case after the second vault has been broken into. So now once they end up getting the money, they start to run to the vehicle. And so Brad is to go and grab Gwen and toss her into the vehicle. And so then, because both Gwen and Ludwig are kind of running to the car, Brad goes and grabs Ludwig and then drops him. And so now Ludwig is to try to scramble and get away from the Interpol police, because Brad makes the conclusion that now that the police are onto them, they eventually have to go and give them someone to chase after while they're trying to get away. And so, of course, Ludwig was to be the scapegoat out of all this. So Ludwig is now kind of like running away from Interpol, eventually going and trying to grab a bike. And now we end up having these weird, goofy, like trick things that Ludwig is to do with this bike, because he's an expert bicyclist also, weirdly. Because if this guy doesn't have one talent, he has to have another. So there's plenty of times where Ludwig is to seemingly be going through these steps and going through these numbers of steps, because of course this place would have a number of steps, and so on and so forth. So eventually pushing on. So luckily enough, we have Ludwig, who is to eventually escape the police because of his bike skill, because they wouldn't have eventually, I guess, because of how narrow all these kind of streets are and whatever, I guess they wouldn't have gotten a car through any parts of where Ludwig is to have actually been at. So eventually, Ludwig is to eventually get away and to eventually scramble back to his place. So while the rest of the team are to kind of have these conflicts, and so both it seems that Gwen and Karina are to eventually decide to separate themselves from Brad and Rolf to just be like, okay, like later days, like freaking like Ludwig was going to be the only one who is going to help us get to that last safe like thing. And so really they didn't need Brad or Rolf really much anyways. Like Rolf like is just to be the getaway car, and Brad had gone into the uh second bank and just gone through and just kind of tranquilized dart everybody with this tranquilized dart gun. So he doesn't actually shoot anybody, he just tranquilized darts people, and is to which I'm like, is that going to be how movies are now, considering they don't want to do the whole blank bullet thing? Eventually, is it just going to be, now that they're going to have to figure out some way to not use guns in a movie, that they're going to just try and do sword films or some other thing that is to eventually like try to avoid with the whole incident of Alec Baldwin? Or are they going to go forward and just try to like, hey, let's use laser guns, or let's use a futuristic movie? Or are they just eventually going to have to CGI in like bullet sprays or whatever? Or come up with some kind of thing for them to do to avoid actually using blank bullets in guns? So, pushing on. So, eventually the girls ditch the boys, and so they decide to go back to where Ludwig's home is to tell him, like, hey, like, are you in? Like, do you still want to do the last case, Ludwig? And he's like, okay, sure. So this third and final safe, they weirdly are to have this safe go on, and the safe is to get transported. And because eventually they're going to try to transport this safe because of the zombie apocalypse. They're trying to want to transport this money so this money will be safe. And I'm just like, why? Like, why? Just like, is the money a big concern? Like, it's not Fort Knox, right? Like, you could still have some money in a certain kind of place and evacuate that. Like, the bigger amounts of money, you should probably evacuate them. Whatever. So Gwen is to find out where the trucker is that is to go and take this safe, which is technically a vault, but whatever, they call it a safe, but I would probably just call it a vault, but I guess that's just me, right? So Gwen is to find the person who is to be the trucker that's to get this safe, and so she knocks him out and then goes and takes the truck. So eventually when they go and they get this safe and have it be dropped in there by crane or whichever, now these two have all the time in the world to eventually have Ludwig go and try to solve this safe and get all the money. I'm like, couldn't they have had all the time in the world technically anyways? Because like Gwen could have just dropped this thing off wherever. And so I don't get why like there seems to be a rush while Gwen is driving that Ludwig actually has to crack open the safe. I don't get that. But that's just me. So eventually we have it to where after Ludwig is to coincidentally break open the safe, and they're like, yeah, we did it again, because why wouldn't we have? All of a sudden we eventually are to have these two meet by two who are to have been, of course, both Brad and Rolf. We have Karina, who ends up getting caught by the Interpol police, and so eventually she's, of course, like questioned by these police and so on and so forth. And like these police are just ridiculously behind on everything, and they like for those of them are like the thought process is they are to know everything of what is to go on, but then they have no clue of what's really going on, which is hilarious to me. So what ends up happening is that Brad is to eventually put a gun against Gwen and is to say like, "Hey, like, how about you join me? Like, like, how about you like give up on this whole Ludwig thing and come with me and we can just be together." And Gwen is like, "I'm sorry, I wouldn't expect like a hero action star to be pulling a gun on a woman." And so Brad is just like, "Well, maybe I'm going to trade up and eventually be the villain of this story or be whatever I need to eventually just get the job done," kind of thing. So eventually we have Brad who is to go on and shoot his gun to eventually find out that there's no bullets that he can be putting into anyone, because Gwen is to say that she ended up taking the firing chamber out of Brad's gun because Brad was to once before go and shoot Delacroix in the butt, and I guess luckily Delacroix had a alcohol cantina on his butt cheek to, I guess, eventually not have him actually be injured. But they are to kind of joke about how Delacroix was to have gotten shot in the butt, which he didn't actually get shot in the actual butt. But whatever, they have to make a joke about it. So, because eventually they basically are to easily know, like Delacroix is to easily know who eventually is to be easily and quickly all involved in this whole like scheme of things, where it's like, oh yeah, I know who the usual suspects are. It's got to be Brad, it's got to be Gwen, it's got to be Rolf, it's got to be all these people easily. And then eventually he ends up going onto a YouTube channel and figuring out, oh, it's got to be also Ludwig. Also, like he's got to be their new safecracker. Because, anyways, so eventually Gwen is to put a gun onto Brad and just be like, okay, you guys go and tie yourselves onto this truck, and eventually Interpol is to be coming to arrest you, and of course they do. So now Gwen and Ludwig are to eventually try and make their getaway, and I guess they have a whole, like, what, 4 bags to their name to go and toss onto this boat to try and make a getaway, which I'm like, God, they have, like, no money. Like, these people have no money. So all of a sudden, Interpol is to eventually go and find both Gwen and Ludwig, and so Ludwig Gwen is to eventually hold gun on this Interpol officer, which is Delacroix. And so Gwen is telling Ludwig, like, hey, how about you just skedaddle out of here and I'll hold them off. So Ludwig is to, of course, go ahead and do that, and he's to drive off with this boat. And so eventually Ludwig is to realize that there are to have been passports in this boat and airplane tickets to have taken both Ludwig and Gwen to the same location. And so Ludwig was like, oh, so she really did like me, and she really did want to go and run off and run away with me this whole entire time. And so Ludwig just kind of feels bad about how that whole thing happened. I'm like, so wait a minute. So Ludwig eventually could have eventually found that woman again and knocked boots with her, but I guess maybe she ended up in prison for I don't know how long, until zombie apocalypse, right? So couldn't they have like that doesn't quite make sense. That how is it like, I think Gwen should have died as well as any number of people possibly, because there seems to be a lot of loose ends here that could have met up with Ludwig within Army of the Dead, but it seemed like they didn't, and you, I guess, have to naturally assume that all the people that were to have been involved in the previous movie or to have all just turned into zombies and Ludwig was basically in the clear. Anyways, so um, the end of this movie was to all of a sudden have Ludwig uh, being at some place where he is to, of course, get offered a job with Dave Bautista and his girl from the Army of the Dead movie. And so, like, that's how they kind of wrap it all up to basically just show you the introduction of these characters and show you the scene that eventually gets them to be offered to want to go to this whole thing and yada yada yada. So with that said, that's all I wanted to say about Army of Thieves. It was just a goofy movie that I did not like, but I spent an hour talking about it for whatever reason. So I'm gonna get the heck out of here. Bye, buddy. Bye, buddy.